Breaking Through the Myths of Sexuality is a talk that was scheduled to take place in Johannesburg by leading behavior specialist Dr. John Demartini. We were hoping to attend that discussion simply because sex is probably one of the most widely discussed topics in the world and is always intriguing, to say the least. We all have our own perceptions of sexuality. Some of them are based on religious views, others based on experience itself. But we also know that some of the most heinous crimes committed are of a sexual nature. So what is a healthy approach to sexuality? Well, to discuss, I have with me a leading opinion on human behavior, Dr. John Demartini. I was really surprised when that discussion was cancelled. I thought that you'd be sold out in a day or two.
I was very surprised too. I thought either the wording in the marketing pieces were not appealing, or people were afraid of facing the part of their sexuality. I don't know, but. I was blessed to do something in the newspaper here about it, at least. And but I thought that education in that field, I think, helps people because there's so many myths that people can run their lives by that can hold them back in their health and their relationships because of it.
Actually, what I did was I posted an invitation on Facebook inviting people to comment on this topic in preparation for today's discussion, and I also hit a dead end. Nobody commented, nobody expressed any thoughts on the subject. But then I noticed that there was some activity taking place in another post. People were fascinated with this new movie that was released, 50 Shades of Grey. Did you watch the movie? Did you read the book?
I haven't seen the movie. I've heard all about it.
Yeah.
And I've heard that it's pretty extraordinary in the sense of looking at the variations and the things that some individuals would want for their sexuality. I've been blessed to interact with almost the entire spectrum of sexuality working with people. And I'm really amazed by what's out there sexually. There's quite a few, there's high extremes and there's some that are down the middle. But
well, that makes the two of us. I didn't read the book, I didn't watch the movie either.
Yes.
What was the important message you wanted to get out by deciding to host this talk?
Well, the objective that I had, the main objective, was that a lot of people, because of subordination to parental authority, possibly, or maybe social authority, or possibly religious authority, have views that are quite tainted, and they are not honoring themselves as a human being with sexual needs. And I think what's happening is, I'm amazed at how many people have a fantasy about how it's supposed to be instead of honoring the way it is. And we're sexual creatures. We have sexual needs. And there's so many myths about it in the sense of what's right, what's wrong, good, bad, everything else, that if a person doesn't fit within a certain boundary, then they're judging themselves and they feel like there's something wrong with them.
And it's quite a simple act, really.
Yeah. And
we complicate it.
Yeah, I think we complicate the thing. But from what I can tell, even in the womb, young boys and girls are exploring their sexuality, which is startling to some people to hear. But if you look at an ultrasound, you'll see that there's actually sexual interaction going on before they're born. And then in early stages of life, this is going on. There's sexual expressions, curiosities. And then by the time they're in their teens, when it's supposedly starting to be acknowledged that now the hormones are coming in and now it's sort of becoming a thing, and they start dating and things, the genders start to attract, then it's okay to start having those thoughts. But in reality, it's there from the beginning. And then there's also people in their 80s and 90s, and I know a 105-year-old that's still sexually active. And I'm inspired by that. You know, we joke about somebody in their hundreds that are still active sexually, but it's quite nice to see that it's just a natural behavior of all species, including human beings. And we've put all the rights and wrongs and goods and bads on it, but it's a natural expression. And sometimes those become extreme, those polarities, those biases about sexuality. And I think that educating them about some more objective information gives people a more grounded view about how to love themselves and love people around them.
Sure. I read numerous books on sex and sexuality, and they're all fascinating. There's so much of analysis out there around sexuality. What I was fascinated about was this connection between spirituality and sexuality.
Yes. In some traditions, there is a correlation between moderating the sexuality is somehow making you more spiritual. And then there's also other extremes where the more you have sexuality, the more spiritual. I've seen both polarities there too. You may have a tantric tradition where you're not to have an orgasm, to have spirituality and expression, to somehow gain some sort of a spiritual experience. And others that to the degree that you have orgasm, you now have a spiritual experience. People even say, oh God, sometimes. So I think that I think looking at that whole panorama, if you go to one extreme or the other, I think you've got out of the middle path. I think moderation, I jokingly said in one of my seminars, sex is designed to be in moderation 12 times a day, jokingly, and people laughed. But I actually met a gentleman who was sexually active multiple times, up to 24 times in a day. And I had another person that would go every 5 years. So I've seen both extremes in sexuality. And some of those are emotionally charged reasons, and some are just libidos or different stages. I always say that whenever you have your values fulfilled, your libido goes up. And whenever your values are challenged, they can go down.
So maybe that's also the spiritual part of sex.
Exactly. Well, if you're living by your highest values and you're living congruently with who you are, because your identity revolves around your highest value and what you're really committed to in life, whenever you are living by there, you have the most resilience and the most moderateness about sexuality. But whenever you're not fulfilled and you're living by lower values because you're subordinating to everybody else's expectation and filling your day with things that is maybe not highest in priority, you're more vulnerable to extremes of sexual behavior. And the reason why we have such extremes is because of people are not always living fulfilled. What we find is people who are really inspired, they convert some of their sexual libido into that creativity.
It becomes an expression of love.
It's an expression of love in another form. And there's many forms of love. I had a woman that came to me and she says, well, my husband's had an affair. And she was irate. And I said, okay, so he's obviously having something in his perceptions that's not fulfilled, and he's looking for something on the outside. So you're now labeling him as an affair. So I asked her, are you, in a sense, having an affair in your own life? And she goes, no, I'm not. I would never have to do that. And I said, well, there's many affairs. You could have an affair with your children and giving all of your intimacy and closeness and sexual energies into your children. Not necessarily sexual coitus, but interaction. Or it could be in your spiritual studies. I've seen people that are so dedicated to their Christian movement or their religious movement that their sexual energy is there and their libido's in that energy. Or their work, they're creative at work. Or maybe their workouts. There's so many places where you can put your attention and not put your attention on the mate. And so they're now looking for somebody to give them attention too. So it's wise to learn how to communicate what's inspiring and important to you in terms of your mates, and they do the same to increase the probability of having a healthy sexual relationship. And whenever there's a sexual repression in a parental system, it very commonly is now dispersed into the family dynamic. I've seen this over and over again in families. So it's wise for the parents to learn how to communicate in each other's values and help each other fulfill their values and have a moderate sexual expression, a normal sexual expression, before it goes to the extremes of repression and hyper-expression with the children. Because the children will express out whatever's repressed in the family.
Sure. Sex is also a powerful way of connecting to another human being that you love, intimately love. So it can be quite emotional if somebody has an affair in a relationship.
Yes.
I'm assuming that a lot of relationship issues are based on sexual issues.
Well, I think that the sex and money still boil down to a lot of issues for people. And I'm not going to go into what that means, but I think that when you go back to the earliest species, you'll find out that reproduction and resource is the two basic driving forces. So money and sex are big driving forces. I have to share this story.
Sure.
I was in New York City, and we went to the zoo, my wife and I, and we watched the mating season. The mating season for the penguins. If anybody here is watching this, if they have the opportunity to see
okay, I have to watch this.
The mating season for the penguins, you will laugh, I guarantee you. Because what you have is this little penguin that's a female that's dressed, sharp and everything else, and she's
flaunting herself
in front of this, walking back and forth and flaunting it in front of this male penguin who's standing proud with a pile of rocks. Okay. And whoever has the biggest pile of rocks gets the prettiest penguin.
Wow.
And the one that has only one rock gets a gimped penguin. Something's missing in the penguin. You see a whole social structure. You see a whole ego game. You see people stealing rocks just to get the pretty girl.
Attention.
I mean, you see the flirting. You see affairs. You see everything that goes on in human behavior you see in the penguin game. And it's hilarious. And you see all your friends and their relationships in these penguins.
So you're saying sex brings out the animal in us,
yeah,
Dr. Demartini?
I think it's part of our animal nature. But it can actually be both animal and it also can be angelic. I think when two people connect eyes and their hearts are open, it's mystical.
Absolutely.
It's an angelic state. When two people are going through the animal behavior, it's a different dynamic. I think we have a little of both in our relationship and our love.
A friend of mine once told me, if you have that angelic experience, sex will never be the same again.
Well, I think it activates our immortal nature, not our mortal nature, and our angelic nature. So I think that if there's true love and appreciation, there's a mystical component. But when there's that's that so-called tantric state.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you need a little bit of animal occasionally. I think if you don't have a little bit of that, it can be incomplete too.
And it's great escapism from time to time, Dr. Demartini.
Yes, I think
we need to escape from the harshness of this world.
But I really believe that anything that
in the arms of a lover. Yes,
anything that you're judging in yourself about your sexuality, that you feel ashamed or proud about, it's wise to find the other side and realize it. When I do a program that's a 7-day program on leadership, and one of the days is on relationships and even sexuality. And I mentioned a height report that was a study that was done back many decades ago in the States. And it showed all the variations of sexuality across thousands and thousands of people that they had studied. And it was really quite revealing. And when people read the report in the class, they went, oh, I'm normal. And they were judging themselves because they were comparing themselves to social idealisms that really had kind of biased perspectives. And when they actually looked and found out that they were human beings and they were normal and that was a normal behavior and those expressions were part of life, they started to love themselves and appreciate themselves. And I always say, if you can't love yourself for your own self-expression, it's difficult to get somebody else to love it. So you got to love all parts of yourself when it comes to sexuality.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Demartini, and we look forward to attending the talk on sexuality. I hope you're going to reinitiate that in Johannesburg soon.
Thank you.